their skills, their abilities, their strength, and what they're able to do. And then it tailors teaching accordingly for these different learners. So today, I have just given us the background. We're going to talk about what adaptive teaching is. We examine the key elements of adaptive teaching. We look at the different components. We talk about adaptive teaching strategies, assessments, and of course, at the end, we will ask for feedback. But you see, the feedback is two-pronged. While we are asking you to rate us on how we performed, we are also giving you an opportunity to fill your exit ticket. In other words, you have learned XYZ. Now give back to us what exactly you are taking away from this session. So you don't want to go anywhere. You want to stay right here till the very end. I'm Olamitoyo Sibabatunde. I'm a global educator. I'm a school leader. I'm a conference speaker, trainer, and facilitator. And with me on the call and my partner is...
I am Adiola Adekoya. I'm also an educator. I am a team lead. I am a conference trainer as well and teacher trainer.
All right, so you're welcome to today's session. I started with a background, an introduction to what adaptive teaching is. Now, let's assume you're a teacher in the classroom, and then you take off your shoes and ask all your learners to fit into the shoe and walk in it. Tell me in the comments, do you think every learner would be able to move far, especially considering the class you're teaching? Some people on this call teach toddlers, some probably teach college students, some teach elementary. If you were to take off your shoes and ask them to step in your shoes and then walk some distance, would every learner be able to fit in and walk some distance comfortably or conveniently? Please tell me in the comments. Yes, thank you, Ben. Not everyone can adapt. Joy, you're welcome. Ben is the only one who responded. Are you sure you're here with me? If you're here on this call, I'd like you to please go into the comments, especially if you're just joining. Tell me your first name, tell me where you're joining from, and then I ask the question. If you were to take off your shoes and ask your learners to walk in your shoes, would everyone be able to walk comfortably and conveniently for some time in your shoes? The truth is, some learners would, especially if you take college students or upper primary, they can't all fit in the shoes, okay? That's if we're saying this, okay, that's another thing. If we say that they should all wear the shoe at the same time, will they all be able to fit in? Absolutely not. And then if you ask them to put on the shoes one after the other, will they all be able to put on your shoes? For instance, I'm a big feet. I can't imagine any elementary learner or early years learner being able to put on my shoes and walk in them, because even some adults wouldn't be able to, right? And so that is where I'm going to start from this evening. It is knowing what fits each child, what suits each child. And let me tell you a story. So I started with the toddler class, the 18 months to 12, 2.5 years. One of the things that worked for me in that class, which interestingly is actually a form of adaptive teaching. Yes, thank you, Tosin. They put their feet in the shoes, but they may not be able to work in it. So I started with this 18 months, we called it the kindergarten class, 18 months to 30 months class. After a while, it was my very first class, by the way, fresh out of NYSC. After a while, I noticed that the children learned in different ways. They had different peculiarities. And so I began to take notes to understand each learner, what was specific to each learner, so that I could reach them and help them learn. I had a learner that would come in at 10, 10:30 every day, even though school would have started at 8. I had one who would come in at 11 without fail. And then I had one that I would either meet him in school or he would come in shortly after I would arrive. Timileyin. What is interesting, or what was interesting about Timileyin was the fact that Timileyin would come in very early, and by 12 noon, Timileyin would drift off to sleep. It was like clockwork. He never failed all through that year I taught him. If he didn't sleep at 12, he would sleep a few minutes to 12, never after 12. Now, what was the problem? Our meal time was at 12. And so after that happened a few times, now he would sleep at 12 and wake up at 5. I closed at 4, but you know how teachers can be now. We'll stay back, we're marking, we're arranging parent for the next day's work. So I would usually stay till around 5 past 5 before leaving. So I knew when he would wake up. And so I realized that it was not an option for him to go to sleep without eating, because that meant he would wake up very hungry. And oftentimes they picked him up at 5 o'clock as well. That meant he would wake up at 5, hungry, cranky, and then he would be dragged home or carried home in that state. So I had to adjust, not just the meal time, it meant adjusting my timetable, adjusting my teaching schedule. I would start his own learning a bit earlier, so that when it was 11:30, I would start, we'll start our meal time, and I would always start feeding him first so that he could finish or at least be almost done before he go to bed. That was adaptive teaching I was practicing. Because while I would start his earlier than the others, for those two who would come 10:30, I mean at 10:30, we're already eating the first, the snack or fruits. Then at 12, we eat the main meal. So I know, okay, for these two, their teaching or classes will start at 11, and then it can extend a bit further in the day. That is what we are talking about, and that's what we are going to introduce you today. Understanding that we can adjust our teaching to better suit this, to suit and be able to support our children when we understand their needs. Now, it doesn't mean that we are going to change the expectations. No, we still have the same high standards, the same expectations, the same learning objectives. We are simply ensuring that we give everybody the leeway to achieve that goal, to achieve that target. So the key elements of adaptive teaching. Number one, we have one learning objective is the same goal that we are heading towards. However, we are providing different routes to get there. What in UDL, Universal Learning Design, or ULD, we refer to as multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation. We are giving them different ways to engage with the learner. So we understand that for this learner, this works better. For this learner, this works better. It's still the same lesson plan. We simply just deliver it in multiple ways so that every learner is involved, every learner understands. So there's number two, high student engagement. Because that's been tailored according to their needs and their skill sets, the students are involved. You have their buy-in, okay? Then your focus is for each learner to reach their full learning potential. You don't want to leave some behind and run ahead with others. So you know your learners and you guide them. I have just given you a practical example, so I'm not going to dwell on that for too long. Then you constantly check for understanding. During this past term, by week 2, I was going around classes, for instance, and I observed that, in some of the tasks in a particular subject, more than half of the class did not score high marks. Immediately, I asked the teacher, what do you think is the problem? Have you taught it again? What are you planning to do? Why was I so interested? If in week 2, learners are already struggling, why do we want to wait till the half-term assessment before we do anything? And then we start collecting data at that time. It's already too late. In the same way, as the learning is going on, you are checking for understanding. You are recording mentally or sometimes in your notes what worked for this topic. What is working right now? What have I asked the learners to do that they can deliver on? And then you're checking in with them. How can I help you learn better? In what areas are you struggling? And then based on that feedback, you adjust the pace, you adjust the number of instructions, or even the form of instruction. So you are expecting them to do 10 things, but then you can see that they're already struggling at number 3 or number 4. Why are you rushing on to number 10? You simply adapt your plans and then you change the pace. If you were planning to fly before, you know that now you have to walk or slow down. And then your implementation of adaptive teaching requires that you know different strategies. And I like to say this, you don't have to wait for your school to send you for a training. I mean, for many of us, we just saw this and we registered. It didn't come from her school. For some, it came from our schools. That's completely fine. But the point is, get skilled, upskill, get better. So learn different strategies, a lot of strategies that you can use in your classroom. Learn scaffolding, learn active learning, learn differentiation, everything that would help you to work better with your learners. Please go for them. And thank God we have different platforms to do that. Now, let's look critically at the different things that we need to do, the different areas that we can bring in to achieve this adaptive teaching in our classrooms. Number one, high student engagement. Are you still doing a lot of talking in your classroom? If you are, then it means your student engagement will be poor, right? You need to ensure that you plan your lesson in such a way that you're getting regular feedback from your learners, from your students. Give them the opportunity to talk. In number two, I am going to ask us to go into the comments and then tell me what you know by active learning. So what is active learning? I am asking because that is one of the terms that a lot of us bandy around in education. What is active learning? In 1 minute, please go to the chat and tell me what active learning is. And if you have friends, colleagues who have also registered for this webinar who are yet to join, please send them a DM very quickly that we're live and the session is underway. While that is also going on, I am waiting to read your answers on what active learning is. What is active learning? Does it mean that we have not heard this term before? We haven't used it before? If you are not familiar with it, then tell me what you think it means. And I promise you that I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to make fun of anybody because I'm not that kind of teacher. So tell me, what is active learning? What do you think it means? Participating through group learning? Okay. I'd like to hear from more people, more participants, please. And then we can talk about what you have said. Getting my learners involved while teaching through hands-on activities. Okay, beautiful. Thank you, Chizoba. And I have one or two more. There are 13 of us here. Okay. When students contribute to their learning. Okay, an instructional approach where students actively engage in their learning through activities like problem solving, discussions, and group work, rather than passively receiving information through lectures. Yes. Thank you. Oluwatosin Amos just sums it up very nicely. So it's not just about group work. Yes, there is that place of group work, but it's more of giving learners an opportunity to engage actively, either with you or with their peers in the classroom while learning is going on, so that they can take responsibility for their learning. So it's about that active engagement from them. They are not just sitting down and receiving everything like empty buckets being or empty pails being filled with water. In this case, the water is knowledge. Instead, they are actively involved. They are taking responsibility for their learning. So we can then achieve that through group tasks, discussions, and other forms. We will talk more about this in detail with some examples. Another strategy, another component that we'll see is student accountability. So it is not just the teacher now who is involved in the process. It's not just about the teachers teaching. It's also about the students learning. They are able to take accountability for their learning because you have engaged them. See, sometimes adaptive strategies include having a sit down with your learner to find out where exactly are you struggling? What are the issues you have? How can I help you? Right? As a teacher, either in the classroom or a subject teacher, one of the things I used to do with my learners was to set goals at the beginning of the school year and then subsequent terms. We agree on their goals, and then we will talk about what they need to do to achieve those goals. Because it's not enough to just set goals. You have to guide them on how they will achieve the goals. So I will talk them through it. We agree on what needs to be done, and then we will both sign an agreement in their notebooks. And then I keep them accountable based on that. And because they see that I am invested in their success, they go all the way. So when learners see that, okay, my teacher is involved, I don't want to disappoint my teacher, I want to achieve this goal that we have set together, they begin to take responsibility and work better to achieve those goals. And then there's a place of creativity. I have already given an example earlier of you checking in the classroom, because you're checking for understanding as the learning is going on. You realize very quickly that these students don't understand this thing. So you are a bit flexible, even though for this week, this is what you have planned, and next week you have something else planned, because you see that learning is not really taking place. Then you can be flexible in modifying your plans. You can teach the same thing in a different way. I'm racing against time at this point. And then there's a place of collaborative learning. Part of adaptive strategies has to do with collaboration. So it's not just you. In fact, there are times that you are just a facilitator, or many times you are just a facilitator, and your learners are coming into the classroom. They take ownership of the learning. You observe, you take notes, you only come in to guide, to direct, and then you give them space to exhibit their learning, to do better, to teach themselves rather. Again, we'll talk more in detail as we go on. And then that gives room for critical thinking. You ask them questions, you allow them to come up with their own questions. You are not intimidated or feeling challenged because they have questions or they have divergent views. No, it is through such discussions, such activities, that learning actually takes place. And then you become better as well as an educator. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Adiola to continue, and then I'll see you later in the session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Taking over from here. So as Toyosi has mentioned with adaptive learning and just using like different strategies to make sure that learners are engaged, we have to remember that in the classroom, we always have the learner in mind. So with the learner in mind, knowing how to adapt, knowing how to adjust our teaching helps us to become better teachers. So we do know that adaptive teaching is just being responsive to the information in the classroom about learning and about adjusting our teaching better. So that way we can support the needs of the students while also maintaining really high expectations for those students. So we also used personalized learning paths for those. One thing that we want to do with adaptive teaching is making sure that the diverse students, the diverse learners in our classrooms are staying engaged. So adapting to the different styles of learning, adapting to the different backgrounds that these students bring in as well, by maintaining high expectations, having student outcomes before even the lesson begins, and also having I can statements, so that way the students know what is expected of them, even as they go through the learning process. And that way they're able to stay engaged and then to reach their full potential. So in order to be flexible with adaptive teaching, we do need a plethora of strategies. So unlike differentiation that is pre-planned, adaptive teaching is really on the spur of the moment. And having those strategies beforehand, prior, helps us to be able to get flexible with those. We're going to go through an ample amount of strategies that you can learn about and then apply in your learning environment. So the first one is RELIA. RELIA is here, we're using real life objects in an environment so that way the students can tie in what they're learning to the real world. An example would be, for instance, in a middle school math classroom, where students are learning about the surface area of a rectangular prism. So instead of just showing them the formula and showing them a table so that way they organize their ideas, you can also bring in like a packaging box, which is a rectangular prism, or a shipping box as well. And then just showing them the different sides. Here is the front, which is the same as the back. And then seeing the dimensions that they use, the left and the right, the top and the bottom. And then that way the students can see in real world what they're learning and then tie both in. Another strategy that we can work on with the adaptive teaching would be gradual release of responsibility. This is Fisher and Frey's gradual release of responsibility, and it works through like a very specific framework. It starts with, it's actually scaffolding the learning by shifting the responsibility of the learning from the teacher through distinct phases to the student. It starts with the I do, which is the explicit modeling of the teacher, and then graduates into the we do, which is the guided practice, where the teacher invites the students into the learning process by questioning and getting responses. And then the we do, where is the students are collaboratively working together to achieve the common goal and the learning outcome. And then the I do. Here is where the student now becomes independent in the learning process. Another strategy is being culturally responsive. The culturally responsive practices incorporate student backgrounds and fosters a sense of belonging and respect in the classroom. Here, you're looking at the students' languages, the students, where they're from, their culture. And the way that you can do it is by using a diverse text. So say, for instance, we have a student who is from Delta State or is Urobo. You bring in a text about, something happening there. And that way the student feels included in the learning environment. You can also do it through examples, through storytelling, and inclusive discussions as well. Growth mindset cultivation is another adaptive teaching strategy. Here, we're encouraging resilience and a positive mindset that can significantly enhance motivation. Here is where the teacher is using reflection journals, feedbacks. The feedbacks are basically not on the outcome, but on the process. So instead of saying, hey, good job on the work that you just did, you're going to praise the process instead. I can see that you're applying your main idea strategies to summarize your text. And so that's the growth mindset that you're cultivating in that sense. Another strategy would be the collaborative learning approaches. So here is where students are working together. There's a lot of peer interaction, there's a lot of teamwork, there's communication going on amongst students in the classroom. You can hear a lot of student talk taking place, and you're promoting collective growth. One of the strategies is think, pair, share. And here, the teacher poses a question, has the students pause for a moment to think through that question. Then they turn to their learning partner, and then they exchange ideas. And then the teacher would ask the question again, and this time around, because students have interacted with one another on the responses, they can share ideas with the class. Group roles would be another way to promote collaborative learning in the classroom. And so here is where you have a group working, or you have small groups working on different tasks. Here you go ahead and assign roles, or the students go ahead and pick the roles by themselves. Roles can be like the leader of the group, the scribe, that's the person who does the writing, the spokesperson who is going to go ahead and present their group's ideas, the timekeeper who keeps the group on task. You've got also the materials manager who makes sure that the group has all the materials they need. Also, that way, you don't have every student in the classroom walking around the class, but you just have only the materials manager getting up from the group to the space where materials have been organized and kept in the classroom to get the group what they need. You can also have the cleanup crew to make sure that the area is tidy once the group is done with their learning. Other collaborative and peer teaching ideas would be using jigsaws, peer tutoring, whereby you have a student who has mastered a skill or strategy and is working with a student who is still struggling with that skill or strategy as well. The project-based learning initiative. Here you're using real-world projects to encourage critical thinking, problem-solving abilities amongst the diverse groups of students in the classroom. So whether a student is below grade level, on grade level, above grade level, you have all these students working together on a project-based learning. Examples of this would be having them work on research, and promoting their thinking, their critical thinking skills, also promoting their problem-solving abilities. An example of this in the real classroom would be if you are integrating different subjects together. Say, for instance, you want the group to work on designing an eco-friendly school garden. This is going to end up covering science because they're designing an eco-friendly school garden. They also need to get dimensions for what that garden is going to look like. That is math. They're going to write about what they're planning to do. And also, once they're finished, they're going to write about what worked well, what didn't go well. And then it also incorporates arts because they would design a garden before they go ahead and implement what that garden looks like. More of effective strategies that teachers can apply as for adaptive teaching in the classroom would be the student-centered learning. Here, you're shifting the focus from a teacher standing in front of the classroom, teacher-led instruction, and just dishing out information to the student, to student ownership of the learning. So the student is guiding their learning. It has to be explicitly explained for it to work effectively. So an example would be using choice boards. A choice board looks like tic-tac-toe or XNO, like some people call it. And it would have a main choice in the center, and then students have to pick either 2 or 3 other choices that match the learning goal and student outcome for whatever it is that we are teaching. Also, the blended learning and technology integration, which is really big right now, this is where we combine the traditional teaching style, which is what most people started off with digital tools, which is where the 21st century is right now. So here you can go ahead and assign work in Google Classroom, and then the students are working on Google Classroom, as well as engaging with text or engaging with worksheets or engaging with whatever it is on paper as well. Edpuzzle is another very great resource that you can use online to blend in your traditional teaching method with digital tools as well. Another good strategy for adaptive teaching is assessment and feedback. And as a matter of fact, adaptive teaching actually rests on assessments. So having ongoing check-ins to guide our learning during the instructions and also at the end of the instruction. Basically, you would do formative assessments, and this is how you know how to adapt what you're doing. If you're going too fast, if you're going too slow, if the students understand what you're learning, or if the students do not understand, and then that way you can adjust or adapt your teaching in the classroom. A summative assessment would be an assessment that you do at the end. And that way, you pick on those data and then you use it to adjust your teaching or to differentiate instruction afterwards. Differentiated and adapted instruction. Here is where we adjust the content of what we are teaching. We adjust the product of what we're teaching. We adjust the process and the environment to meet the diverse learners in our classroom. In order to be able to do this, we basically would use diagnostics And so that way we can see exactly where learners have struggling needs and where they excel or where they have mastered skills. Example would be tiered assessments, or assignments. So for instance, if you have a reading passage, if this is reading, the students might be all reading on the same topic or on the same person, but the text level would be different depending on the levels of their reading. Learning stations is another method, and so having different learning stations, and I'll use an ELA or reading classroom for example. You might have one station working on vocabulary, you might have one station working on a reading passage that works on a reading strategy or skill. You might have some students working on a diagnostics or working on personalized learning path. And then you have teacher guided station where the teacher is working with a group of students on a specific skill or strategy. Small group instruction, always very powerful. Here is where you're just working with a small group, and then you're also working on targeted growth or targeted skills that the small group can work on. So using or utilizing formative assessments to tailor or to adapt our teaching methods in order to improve our students' outcomes. The one thing that we want to do is have continuous feedback mechanisms. You want to have ongoing assessments to provide timely insight, so that way you know on the spur of the moment how to adjust or how to adapt your teaching effectively. Another thing that you would want to do is to have data-driven instructional strategies. So that way it is not just picking one strategy and using it, but you're using the data or information that you have picked from in order to know exactly where the students' needs are and exactly how to fill in those gaps. Integrating technology for assessment, also extremely powerful. It's using digital tools to enhance assessments and the assessment process, and to provide feedback instantly. So in the moment, again, remembering that adaptive teaching is when you are in the moment tailoring or adapting or adjusting your teaching to ensure that all students' needs are met. So here are just showing the different elements of adaptive teaching and how it can increase the engagement in the classroom. So we've got adaptive teaching techniques. It has high expectation. You're making sure that you're using formative assessments, which is assessments that you're doing on the spot and in the middle or while during the teaching, ongoing assessments. You've got student engagement. That is, all the students are interested, they're invested in the learning. And then you have diverse learners in the classroom. They could be diverse in their learning styles. They can be diverse in their learning abilities, being below grade level, on grade level, or above grade level. And they can be diverse in their cultural or their background as well. All right, so the process of adaptive teaching, the big thing that we're remembering again is we have the learner in mind. So we cannot say that we have done any teaching if there's no learning taking place. Having high expectations for all of our students, setting ambitious goals, and also providing that scaffold while we're fostering a culture of achievement amongst learners and encouraging effort and persistency. So this is what the process looks like. You want to use engagement techniques. We're utilizing active learning and collaborative methods, this way to increase student accountability and motivation. The next thing we're also making sure we're doing is frequent assessments. We're regularly checking for understanding, and then we're guiding and adjusting our instructions and instructional strategies based on those assessments in order to meet and support the diverse learning needs of all the students in our classroom, of every single student in the classroom. Intentional adjustments. So with strategies in place, having all the different strategies, you're able to know how to adjust, where to adjust, either the pace, the cadence of the voice of the teacher, the intentionality of the teacher, making sure that we're tailoring our pace and our approach of lessons, and making sure that every single student in our classroom, every single child can reach their full potential. So in the beginning, Toyosi had talked about active learning approaches. And so here we are going to go ahead and just dive in a little bit on active learning approaches. So here is where we are. Active learning approach is when we have students actively engaged in the learning process. One of the strategies is to think, pair, share. And so here is where a teacher would ask a question, give the students a moment to think on whatever the question was, and after a few seconds would ask them to pair up with a partner. So it would usually be their sitting partner right beside them. And then they would turn and learn about what it is that the teacher has asked. And then at this point, since everybody has been actively engaged and has exchanged ideas, now they can go ahead and share this idea with the class. So an example is, after reading a passage, the teacher can ask, why do you think the character made that choice? Why it works is because everyone in the class, every single person has a chance to think about what the question was, has a chance to talk and learn with the person beside them. And even the shy learners also have a chance to participate in the classroom discussion. Another active learning approach would be role play or simulations. So here, the way that it works is learners end up acting out real life situations from a scene or from a story. An example would be, say, like in civic education, role play a town hall meeting to solve community issues. I would use a language classroom as another example. So say, for instance, there's like a French language classroom and they're working on imperative, which is one of the tenses. The teacher can have them role play a restaurant. And so you can have one student role playing as the chef, one student role playing as the waiter, and maybe 2 or 3 students role playing as their clients or their customers. And then they're using tenses in that verb tense to practice. And so by role playing, all the students practicing the skill, practicing the student learning outcome for the day, and they're all actively engaged in the learning process as well. The reason why this works is it builds confidence because they're practicing. They're not just passively learning, they're practicing it. It also builds empathy because students are now interacting with one another, gaining more understanding. And then their communication skills, which is a vital skill for today, is also being worked on and encouraged and built. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass it back on to Toyosi.
Thank you, Diola. All right, so let's talk about jigsaw learning, still part of the active learning approaches. How does this work? So let's say you have water cycle as a topic. Instead of teaching, explaining, you don't even have to use videos at this point, right? Simply put them in study groups for each subset of that topic. They go ahead, they study in their groups, they discuss what the learning is. They can even come up with PowerPoint slides, or possibly a large sheet or cardboard where they have drawings to explain, so a diagrammatic explanation of each of the subsets of that topic. Then you put them together in groups. So every learner in each group gets to explain to the learner in another group. That's what the jigsaw learning is. They go apart to learn, then they come together to share their learning. That's what the jigsaw learning is about. And then you have the PBL, project-based learning, problem-based learning, or the case study. Here, there's a real-life problem. For example, in social studies, you're talking about your town has too much waste. How can we manage it? What you're teaching is actually waste management, right? But You don't want to just come, oh, today we are learning waste management. What is waste? No. So instead, you ask them the question, a real life question, a case study. There's too much waste in this town. How can we manage it? So first, they identify what waste is. At that point, you are not the teacher, you are a facilitator. You're simply ensuring that there is conversation going on in the classroom based on what that learning is. And so they talk about it. They come up with different ways to manage waste, different ways to reduce waste. At the end of the day, what have you done? You have just built reasoning, decision-making, problem-solving, teamwork. You have even helped. So there's also that cross-curricular reference of vocabulary development. Yet, you are simply teaching waste management in social studies. We probably have learned many of these approaches, right? But the problem is we often forget to bring them into everyday use. And sometimes it is because we feel we do not have sufficient time, right? Because we feel we do not have sufficient time in our classrooms, but nothing could be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, these approaches save you time, they drive home the learning, and then they help the learners in that they remember what they have learned. They are able to put them into practice. And so I'm just going to skip the next slide very quickly. I'm going to share a link with us later on. But before I share the link for the feedback and exit ticket, which is where you will drop your answers in your notebook that you've used for this session. And if you haven't written anything, too bad, you now have to write. Think of the different strategies we have shared. Which three would you like to start using or implementing in your classroom? Okay? Please put that down. And then I'm going to share a link with us very soon where we will drop one, feedback on today's session, and more importantly, share what we are going to do in our classroom as a result of today's session. Remember, just as you will do in the class where you take learners through evaluation, that assessment of learning, that is what we are going into very soon. So back to the PBL and some of the strategies we've talked about already. I wanted to also share this, that in an adaptive teaching situation, the most important thing or most important skill that you need as a teacher is flexibility. You need to be able to assess learning as it is going on and modify accordingly. Remember, I gave that example earlier. Just a minute. I want to read out one or two things for us to have in mind. So, in order to do this effectively, what do you need to understand? I'm summarizing for you already. Number one, what do my learners already know? So you gauge prior knowledge for you to effectively do adaptive teaching. So what do my learners already know? Two, what are their learning styles and preferences? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses in terms of teaching and learning? Where do they struggle? Where do they have difficulties? And then their background. Okay, thank you. Their background, what they are interested in. There was some time ago, I was observing a teacher and he was teaching verbs. But guess what? In teaching the verbs, he put the children in different learning groups, and these learning groups were interest-based groups. And then he had images, visuals based on the different learning groups. So some, they had pictures of football, different sizes, different types, different colors. They had that. Some, it was pictures that had to do with fashion. So each interest group had pictures in line with their interest. And then they had to come up with sentences using lots of powerful verbs related to their interest area. That is one other thing you can consider. Okay, I'm going to take that again very quickly, Chizoba. I explained earlier that for you to effectively achieve the adaptive teaching classroom, These are things that you must have in mind. One, what do my learners already know? That's the prior knowledge. What's their prior knowledge? Two, what are their learning styles and preferences? What are their strengths? What are their differences? What are the weaknesses, pardon me? What are the difficulties that they already have? And then what are their backgrounds? What are they interested in? And that was when I talked about having a lesson based on interest-based groups, right? I hope you got that now. So it's important that you are flexible as a teacher, because the winning streak for a teacher who practices adaptive learning in the classroom, adaptive teaching, pardon me, in the classroom, is that that teacher is able to think on his or her feet. So you're teaching, for instance, your learners do not seem to understand what you're teaching. What are you going to do differently? How are you going to change that? Are you going to just end the class and say, okay, I'll go and think of a better way to teach it? Or are you able to effectively modify the teaching content or the teaching approach to suit the current situation? Let me give you an example. So you're teaching, let's say you are teaching skip counting, and then you have used the number line, you have used this, you have used that, and it looks as if a greater portion of the learners still struggle with the learning. How about you create squares on the ground quickly and let them hop across numbers for them to understand the concept of skip counting? How about you do that? Or you're teaching the solar system and they don't understand the orbital move of the sun or of the earth or of the planets, whichever one it is in this case now. Why don't you turn your classroom, label different children, let them have it on their chest: Sun, Earth, Mercury, Mars, Pluto, Jupiter. Why don't you have labels and place across all their chest, and then someone stands who is the sun, and then everyone is moving around the sun. And they stand, based on the labels you have given them, they stand in relation to where they should be. Then they rotate. It helps them to remember that the sun is static. We are the ones who moved around the sun. XYZ moved so times at so speed. The earth, which was Janet, moved in this way. That way they will understand immediately. But what happened? You were teaching, you had played the videos, you had used the different strategies in your well-planned lesson plan. And you realize, as a teacher who is an expert with adaptive teaching, that you were just talking to yourself. And so what did you do next? You simply adapted, modified the learning to go along with the learners. That exactly is what adaptive teaching is all about. Now, can you share with us, please, before I even drop the exit ticket, what are you taking away from today's class? What have you learned? Please share with us in the chat. What have you learned? What are you taking away from today's session? I've dropped the feedback and exit ticket, and then I'll just share with us very quickly other things that we have planned for us in the next few months. So as educators ourselves, who have grown through the system in different places where we are, we understand the importance of continuous professional development. And we know that they are not always enough, and there's never too many, actually. And so every quarter, starting from now, okay, so we have had for this quarter, in January, we will have another one. So we'll have different free webinars every quarter from now till the end of next year, God willing. But then in January, we do plan to have a masterclass. It's a 4-week masterclass. And the theme is Educators Growth Accelerator. For that one, it will be a paid event. The quarterly webinars are basically free webinars. ensuring that we are giving back to society, but more importantly, we are providing support for our own, right? So we will share more details with you via your email and SMS as time goes on, or sometimes maybe on WhatsApp, okay? We'll share more details with you about the masterclass. But the goal of the January masterclass is to help you grow bigger in 2026. Now, growing bigger will mean different things to different people, I'm sure. But the important thing is for you to upskill and to break whatever limits that is holding you back, whatever is keeping you in a place. You feel that you are more, you can be more, you can do more. January masterclass will provide that opportunity for you. But apart from that 4-week masterclass, we still have Future by Design, Not by Default as the January training session. Okay, the free webinar for that quarter will still hold apart from the masterclass. And in that webinar, we are going to be focusing still on your growth and becoming better. In the masterclass, we will be joined by 1 or 2 other global educators who will share a lot of interesting things with you. But I'm not going to spill. And at this point, I'll hand over to Diola to say a few words as we round off. Please click on the link and share with us your feedback about today's session. And more importantly, fill your exit tickets. You know, that's your assessment for today's class. Thank you for joining. Adiola, over to you now.
Thank you all so much for joining. We know that we threw out a lot of strategies, but we also were aware and mindful of your time. Just remember that when we're talking about adaptive teaching, it's not just about preparing lessons and, it is more about being attentive. It's more about being flexible. It's more about being intentional on how you respond to the learner in the classroom. It's not just focused on your lesson plan, which is very important, but it is also focused on adjusting the teaching as you feel you gauge the room and gauge the learning process and how the learners are receiving information as well. We would like to say a huge thank you for everyone who took time out of their precious day to attend this webinar. Thank you so much, and we hope that you were able to pick 1 or 2 strategies, or also to be able to solidify some of the strategies that you may already be practicing. But just being aware, getting more and more strategies and tools in your teaching toolbox, and becoming a better version of an educator that you already are.
Thank you, everyone. I see someone just joined again. I'm posting the link one more time. We'd like you to also tell us in the comments, did you get value today? Are you looking forward to the next webinar in January? Please tell us in the comments, did you get value today? If you got value, please share value or I got value.